Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue working on our dodgeball game with roguelike elements. Now, last time we continued working on roguelike elements for our Dodgeball Roguelite with the addition of even more classes. However, they weren't classes for the player, but for the CPU opponents. That's right, even the CPU get classes, and we managed to add half of said classes. Well, at least their abilities. And the reason we only got halfway was due to some unexpected technical oversights, which will be addressed in due time. However, that's not the focus of today's plan. We will be adding the remaining half of the CPU classes to the game. This will, of course, include the addition of their abilities, which, if we're lucky, won't be halted by any more technical issues. And finally, we'll assess our classes and their abilities for next time, where we'll start tweaking everything we've added over the last few episodes. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. Now, before we could get to the new classes, the splitter's elimination spawn code was made into a function, so that we could use it with our next class, the stubborn. And much like the split, the stubborn spawns a new unit on elimination, which was meant to be interpreted as, the stubborn having to be eliminated twice. It was clear that this would need changing, but for now it worked and our function worked, so it was on to the next class. Up next was the stone class, which would require a new object, the blocker. These blockers would be spawned by the stone class in a random location on the player's side of the play area. This was meant to block the player and reduce their free space by acting as impromptu walls. However, during testing, I had a better idea. A directional check was added to the player-to-blocker collision. Using that directional check, the blocker would then apply some force to the player, thus creating a spring-like collision effect, basically forcing the player to move in a random direction relative to the blocker that they just collided with. It's a little evil, but the CPU opponents aren't messing around. This is dodgeball, baby. Anyway, with the stone class now in working and improved order, it was time for our final class. Now, this class would require a special version of the player, which I called Zombie. A special zombie version of the player's sprite was added to the code, and then it was time to work on the summoner. Similar to the split and the stubborn, the summoner creates zombie minion versions of the player to do their bidding. The catch, however, is the zombies only exist for a certain amount of time, which ended up working out quite nicely, but clearly needs major tweaking for the sake of balance. And that did it for the 6 CPU classes. Now, as mentioned earlier, the stubborn really needed an improvement to make it something other than a less effective splitter. So instead of simply spawning a normal unit on elimination, the stubborn would then quote-unquote transform into a random CPU class, including normal units. This should technically put the stubborn on a more even level as a splitter, if not higher. But anyway, there's a ton of tweaks that need to be made now that our classes have been added. Most notable is the cooldown/effect timers mentioned last episode. Also, I'm almost positive that the zombies are going to be nerfed. They'll likely only spawn once CPU players get eliminated, or zombies in general won't be able to interact with balls. Because right now I feel like they're far too overwhelming, especially if every CPU ends up rolling summoner. And those are just some of my thoughts for this episode. It's clear we've basically got a laundry list of tweaks, fixes, and balancing to do, which is why I've decided to cut this session short. Technically this session was just as long as any other session, but the amount of work we're about to put in was drastic enough that I definitely needed to take a break first. So that'll do it for this episode of Let's Dev. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.